The session is on thought leadership, why empowered leaders will lead to better implementation. Now, I'm going to start really by using two little anecdotes and analogies. One is about a military analogy, and it's about a phrase that goes like this: on the battlefield, mission success relies on the participation of everyone, from frontline troops all the way to the top. And the second thing I want to leave you with to start off is a quote from Robin Sharma, the management and wellness guru. And he says, lead without title. And please keep these two things in mind as I ask each of the panelists, and we'll start off with you, Melissa. What does empowered leadership mean to you?
Yeah. Hi, Brian. And, thanks for starting out with this battlefield analogy. Because actually I actually remember a pitch I heard from a startup founder in the States, and he is an ex-Marine. And, he actually told me about one of the things that they, one of the leadership things that they really live by, which is in the absence of a leader, lead. So this philosophy, I think, is very, very important in terms of empowerment, because what happens is a lot of times in very hierarchical structures. So if we work in like typical corporate structures, which have a lot of hierarchy built in, sometimes when the leader is absent, all we get is, leader is on leave, please come back next week. So I think that kind of culture, or that kind of thinking really has, leads to a lot of disempowerment and a lot of bottleneck in decision making. So when we go into the fast moving world of innovation, where decisions have to be sort of like taken at breakneck speed, or even on the battlefield, right? You can't say, oh my gosh, the leader is gone, right? So what do we do? The next in command has to take over. And so I think this sort of culture is really important for organizations to kind of see how they can fit into their existing processes, so that they can actually make quick and effective decisions as a team in times of battle, in times of war, in difficult times, and fast moving, very volatile and uncertain times. Yeah.
And how about you, Shireen?
Interesting, Brian. I mean, taking this analogy further on this war game kind of analogy, right?
There's war out there.
There was a very successful brigadier general in the US Army in charge of a ship, and he did a turnaround from one of the lowest performing aircraft carrier to the most efficient aircraft carrier, and he wrote a book, and it's called "This Is Your Ship." So in line with what you're saying with Robin Sharma, it's about leadership. Is everyone is a leader as far as Robin Sharma's book is concerned. Everyone is a leader. It's not a position. Taking a leadership role is not about having a position. It's about taking that responsibility and take that ownership, accountability, and influence the direction of organization. So really, this is your ship, and everyone in the boat has to be hands on the deck to get it into the right direction.
And Andrea, how about yourself? What are your thoughts on this to start off with?
I think if I carry on from your battlefield analogy, I think the first thing we have to understand, and we are talking in the 4.0 conference here, is that the battlefield has changed. The battlefield has changed fundamentally. So I see there's a question in the chat there, why would billionaires want to go to space, right? Because that's how far the battlefield has changed. So if a billionaire goes to space and mines another planet and increases the excess of raw materials and resources by another planet's value, it will change the fundamental basis of business in the world, sorry. So when we look at leadership today, the context is completely different, and therefore you find that most large organizational structures are becoming defunct. Agility takes a completely different meaning today. Competence is the measure. It's no longer a function of hierarchy or years of experience, right? The most competent person is at the front, and as soon as he's not, he needs to allow for the next competent person to step forward.
But okay, so I want to use I want to take a little segue on our space discussion now, because it's all about leadership. So guess what? The two biggest players in the space race, on the private space race, are Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Essentially, two of the among the two wealthiest individuals on the planet. What are their leadership styles? Is that empowerment, or is it a command and control?
If I can just jump in on that one, Brian, I think first foremost, if you subscribe to Daniel Coleman's idea of leadership, I mean, they are definitely visionary. Yeah, so probably democratic, but I just want to stretch a bit from what Nakib was saying. I think, the battlefield is not just stretched to the moon, so to speak, right? But the battlefield is now so wide and varied, because if you look at in the context of Malaysia, while we're talking about Industry 4.0, we have a huge number of industry players who are still Industry 2, right? While we're talking about internet, 5G, and we still have, patches of a lot of places where we still have 3G, 2G lines. So, so the battlefield is very different. I mean, we're looking at 1.2 million registered businesses, 98% or 1.1 million thereabout, right? SMI, SME, whereas the mid-tier is about, almost 1% and less than 0.5% large corporation. The large corporation and the mid-tier are quite savvy in terms of, going with Industry 4.0. But the SMI, SME, where out of that 98%, almost 60-70% are micro SMI, SME with 1 to 3 people who's talking about survival and not talking about Industry 5.0. So you see that the battlefield is so wide, and so yes, when we talk about going and race among, and when you lay that with globalization, when you lay that with RCEP coming in and the regional cooperation, economic, breaking out the barriers and whatnot, the landscape of the battlefield is varied and very different. So from a government perspective, to me, you need to understand you cannot use the same brush across the board. The policy that applies to the SME may be different than the mid-tier and the large corporation, but at the same time, you have majority that are small players that so you got to apply, very specific policy for different kind of war turf, if you like.
And Sharon, I want to bring this up, and Melissa, please comment on this, because the reality is this: our SMEs. So it's back to culture. Now, Malaysia itself. So, what is empowered or leadership for a Japanese and an American is completely different. What they perceive to be enabled leadership, empowered leadership. In a Malaysian context, for some of our SMEs, it's just a command and control. I tell you what to do, you do it. I mean, and that is the problem, because how are we going to evolve and embrace Industry 4.0 if we don't change or help to change the culture in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, well, my first reaction to your early question is, don't forget Richard Branson. He'll be upset if we don't mention him in this billionaire space race. I mean, they all have their egos, He's going to be calling you up. It's Elon Musk, Richard Branson, and Jeff Bezos. But back to cultural thing. But I think, okay, leaders, a lot of them have egos, right? And I think, it's easy to say, I guess, East or West or anything, but even within individual organizations in a country, so even in Japan or even in Malaysia, we have very, very, top-down style leadership, and we also have very flat style organizations, right? But I think it's a fine balance between empowering and a total hands-off approach, because we also have that, right? We have leaders where they delegate everything, and probably everything's delegated and nothing's left for them to do, right? So I think for a leader, they all have to understand their role, right? Which is that commitment, that vision, that strategy that I think earlier in one of our conversations, Brian, you mentioned that this space race is almost a 20-year project in the making. It's not an overnight decision by the leader like, hey, let's go to space next year, right? So to be able to sustain the investment and the the drive and the execution for 20 years to finally successfully get to space requires and takes a lot from a leader. So while we see their big egos and all their publicity and everything, we actually seldom get to see what goes behind the scenes. And I think that is the essence of their leadership and their leadership style. And one thing that I noticed watching that space race is just how proud everyone at Mission Control was individually in their own contributions. So I think that's empowerment, right? That while there is a leader, there is somebody setting the direction, but everyone else on the team feels that they have made a significant difference and contributed something to the success of the mission. And so this sort of culture, I think it's not unique to any one country, but it is something that is particularly needed for an organization to be innovative, right? A leader with a strong leader with really that great drive and vision, but also the ability to make each of their team feel empowered and contributing, and not just someone taking orders and doing whatever they're told, because that would be very counterproductive for the organization.
And to use the space race, that's where you got the superior outcome, because they're doing it cheaper, faster, and better than NASA.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So if I can chime in there.
He's the expert.
Yes, he's the man.
Yeah.
And to say something. So, I mean, imagine yourself as Richard Branson, right? And SpaceX One, and you've gone up there and you're looking at the world, and now you offer a ticket to anyone for $1 million to have the same perspective as you, right? That's quite important, right? For $1 million today, which will obviously reduce over time, you will have a perspective that nobody except for a handful of astronauts in the whole of humankind's existence will have. And that perspective is an important thing we have to consider, because looking at the world from that perspective means that the whole world now becomes something completely different to everyone. There's no more leaders which we say, they're all coming from America, they're all going to come from, Caucasian backgrounds and so on and so forth, right? You're going to have leaders like Elon Musk popping up everywhere. I play guitar, for example, right? And if you just look at YouTube videos of Indonesian children in some of the most remote areas, some of them are playing the most complicated guitar pieces that have ever been written. And the only reason they can do that is because they have access to YouTube. And there is a second lower valued guitar industry that's bludgeoning all over Indonesia. So talent now is going to be a completely different game as well, with that kind of perspective. So again, leadership, right? You can't differentiate yourself just by being good in Malaysia. And therefore, our SME supply chain cannot benchmark itself by who's next door. You have to look at the Richard Branson view and say, who am I competing with globally? Otherwise, you're not relevant.
Natya, I wanna take your point up about youth. Is empowered leadership then, and open this question to the three of you, very age determined? What a young person perceives as empowered leadership is very different from what a 50-something-year-old or 60-something-year-old.
If I can take that one, definitely, I think the perception will be different. The demographic changes will definitely influence the way people think, the way society behave, the way we react towards industry movement and so on. So that's a given for sure. But to me, not trying to make this just an aeronautic discussion, yeah. So trying to bring it back to Industry 4.0 and our industry at large. So to me, the reality on the ground that we got to understand is this: entrepreneur at large are very autocratic leadership, and that's how they became. They are visionary, but they're autocratic. They own the business and they say, I have this idea, I'm going to march with it. You guys, I'm going to hire you, do what I tell you to do, what to do. And that's 98% of Malaysian industry, 98% of the SME. Okay, most of them will have that. But I've been down there, and I've been in the mid-tier, and I've been at the multinationals, and you will see the different style of leadership among the entrepreneur and the mid-tier and the more established organization that is a bit more democratic and more visionary, setting the vision and empowering the people. Yeah, but when we talk about Industry 4.0 leadership in the era of Industry 4.0, the majority of the entrepreneur has to realize the kind of autocratic leadership is no longer should no longer be the norm. Yeah, because the globalization, the democratization of knowledge, democratization of industry, the interconnectedness of globalization, if you remain, very tunnel vision, I'm the only one who knows how to do this, you're going to be a real dinosaur. So this is the realization. You see, if I'm looking at this whole program today and I'm saying that, look, it's interesting, we talk about Industry 4.0 and a number of sessions that we had before this, we're talking about, how you implement it, how you do about it. And then the leadership is put in the breakout session. I think the leadership should be part of this big thing because, you cannot do all of that because leadership is going to be dictate all the things that you talk about, right? Because more so when you have 98% of your industry are still, autocratic leadership. So you got to change those guys, and those guys got to realize that, look, you cannot think like that, and therefore leadership is going to play an important role in terms of how you carry out your Industry 4.0 journey. And you can no longer, I mean, you can imagine in the old days where entrepreneur thinks that they know everything, and that's fine if you are still working just, at FMCG, at food, beverage industry, bread and butter kind of business. But if you're going into technology, you're hiring people who are more talented than you and you don't empower them, it's a big mistake, right? So this is where I think leadership has to change, and the people, and again, I mean, leadership here, when we talk in terms of Robin Sharma's perspective, where everyone is a leader, even the workers, those that are the staff that is being hired, they have also to change their mindset because they are leaders themselves, because they cannot afford to think like before, I'm just an employee, so you tell me what to do and I'll just follow. Because they also have to take the lead in terms of, hey, how can I recommend things, change the direction? This is your ship, change it together as a group. And a democratic kind of leadership is very important in moving in Industry 4.0.
Najib, your thoughts?
Well, I think one thing you have to not do is try to equate what Malaysian industry is in terms of DNA to, say, German industry, right? So our DNA is an FDI DNA, right? So most of the large corporations that have come here from abroad, or the large corporations in general, right, either coming from abroad or grown over here, are not run by engineers, right? So at the top of the chain, most of it is finance background, right? Or in some cases, legal backgrounds, right? Which means they're operational organizations. And that's a major issue because I mean, if you read Mariana Mazzucato's work, right, and Kate Raworth's work on all these new economic models, right, those professions come from a section called rent seeking, right? And rent seeking effectively means that you're making money off other people's backs, right? So, and in fact, that's exactly what it is, because so long as somebody is producing the technology somewhere else, these people have business, right? So long as there's stuff to dig out of the ground, there's something to sell, these people have business. But when those two things dry up, you have a fundamental issue. Then you look at the supply chain of the SMEs. What are they doing? You find that most of the qualifications of our leaders in the SME level for the E&P and M&E sector, very hardworking people, but most of them at certificate level qualification, right? Which means they were people who came from the factory shop floor, came out, got some work from where they were working before, built the factory, and then went out, right? So DNA is very different from the German factory, who's got generations of people who have built on technology. The great-grandfather could have been a clockmaker, and today the son is an aerospace engineer. The great-grandson is an aerospace engineer. That company has a heritage of technology. So the DNA is completely different. And sometimes Malaysians, they try and say, let's just be like them. You have to understand the foundations of the industry are completely different. So what you need to use 4.0 is is in changing that basis. You have to understand how that basis is changing. And that's what I advise with SMEs. If they cannot understand that, and you have to handhold them through that process, they will never get into that level of, they'll just become technology adopters, as good as buying a mobile phone.
Now, Melissa, your thoughts?
To your question about young versus old leadership styles and what is empowerment, does it vary by generation? I have, I don't know if this is going to be a popular opinion because, we have, but I think whatever the youth think that empowerment is actually going to be the future. So, like what the older, I don't know whether, the older generation will say, okay, empowerment is so and such and such, and giving you this portfolio. But I think the youth attitude towards work, the gig economy, all that, whether you embrace it and you're excited about it, or you're on the other side of the coin, you're like, oh no, what is corporate Malaysia going to become, right? What is industry going to become? Actually, in another few years, all of the youth of today will be in varying positions of leadership, and how they view empowerment and how they view how they work as a team, that is really going to dictate the culture of an organization. So I think what's important now is really to understand that, to understand how our youth like to work or prefer to work or want to work, and create an environment, or if you're a large organization, to create an environment where they feel at home and they feel like they can contribute and to manage a team, right? So when we as leaders, if you're hiring a team, you have to understand the changing trends in culture and the changing trends in how people like to work. And it's quite shocking because I often see generation gaps all the time, and they're like, oh, is this how he came for an interview? Is this how they answer an interview question, right? But you know what? If that's how all of the youth answer it, it's probably going to be the norm in a few years, which is scary for someone on the other side of the coin. But it's something that we really have to embrace. We really have to understand how can we create organizational structures and how can we create leadership that actually taps on the best, the energy, the creativity, and the innovation of the youth, while maybe fitting around some of their more maverick styles of working, right? That we often hear stories about. I mean, you're in HR, or people in HR will probably understand, because I have friends who share stories with me, and it's quite interesting. But I always say, you know what, that's going to be the future, right? If all youth are like that, then I guess that's the new face of industry.
I like to interject what Melissa just said. While I mean, it reminded me a bit about whether you should adopt an open economy or you should adopt a government interventionist kind of economy policy. Yeah. So I mean, there's these two arguments that either you let the masses of the future, the demographic changes dictate what is the kind of leadership is going to happen, or should you guide them to where the direction should be? I mean, reality is a bit of this and a bit of that, right?
Yes.
So to me, if you let the young guys, dictate everything, then everybody become an e-gamer, right? So then.
Okay, but Shari, so here's where I've changed my thinking, right? So, Sharin, in the 90s, we used to read about people in the Silicon. So this is how old I am. I give away my age. So we used to look at the people, and I used to work in technology in the 90s, from the 90s onwards. So it's a long time. And we used to look at people in the Silicon Valley and like, wow, they don't get any work done. What do you mean? Like they get free food and they go to office in jeans and whatever. But like Melissa said, that was the forerunner to the norm. So what we should be looking at in terms of leadership and how to manage them is look at them today and start preparing and accommodate for the new norm. I mean,
no question about that.
That's my thoughts.
No question about that. I think, definitely whoever is practicing management definitely has to take into account the prevailing forces, the prevailing culture and practices. No question about that. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you should not influence it, right? For example, a good polarized view would be like this. I mean, Western democracy and Chinese communism? Which is better? I mean, if you look at America now and you look at China now, you would say, hey, China has a good control of the economy compared to what's happening in America. But you say that 50 years ago, people will say, no, follow America. So,
Correct.
The circumstances has changed so differently, and China has adapted their version of communism with a global capitalism. So they adapt with the changes because China back then could not do what they were doing today, right? So similarly, to me, here, when we talk about, you see, the danger is this, right? Prior to COVID, prior to Industry 4.0, prior to all this globalization, push ourselves 10 years ago, right? People look at all this IT industry and all are just projects that they will do for their organization. So I'm going to have an IT project, so let's bring in all the computers, right? But you see, as we move into Industry 4.0, the leaders got to understand it's not project. You got to embrace the technology, and the culture has to change. The organization has to change. The thinking has to change. Your role is not about Industry 4.0 and look at technology and what can we implement. It's not as it is like 10, 20 years ago. It has to be looked at as how do technology is a means to improve productivity. How do I influence with the constraints that I have in terms of the manpower, in terms of demographic, in terms of the behavior? How do I apply the right technology with the right processes, okay, so that it will then improve my productivity, so that then I can remain competitive. So technology, I mean, the biggest failure will be if 98.6% of our industry look at Industry 4.0 as implementing as an IT project. And believe me, that's majority what's happening now, and that's scary because that mindset has to change. And who is going to change it? The leaders. The leaders got to understand that, look, there's a shift in the landscape, and there must be a shift in thinking. There must be a shift in mindset in terms of how you implement this. And it's, to me, it's a burning platform that, the urgency to change our leadership mindset and thinking. Because when you look in a systemic point of view, it's not just the business, because 70%, if not 80%, of our economy are run by government and government-linked companies. So government plays a huge role in dictating. But I mean, the leaders in the government agencies is going to play a pivotal role to make things happen. So I mean, it's a systemic problem.
Well, I think
could we take a pause at the moment
sorry.
now to answer a question? L. Chan has been persistent, and I'm going to read out one of his questions. Now, key opinion leaders, social influencers, and Gen Z are overtaking as laissez-faire leadership styles. What are your thoughts?
Go ahead, Najib. You wanted to say something?
Yeah.
While the thought is still fresh.
Okay, I mean, I'll answer that question. I was going to comment more on Dr. Shadin's sort of thing, but yeah, in that case, I don't think it's a laissez-faire per se. I think it's more inclusive. Certainly, the younger generation is much more inclusive in terms of the laissez. Because if you're laissez-faire, you're going to fail as a business, full stop, right? It's not as if it's a choice. You have to all be hardworking. I think where you are today with the youngsters is they try to be inclusive in the decision making because they know it's a collaborative effort. So that's how they are, and they're much more empowered in the context of knowledge, right? So I set my son at the weekend task to write about Al-Khwarizmi, the inventor of algebra, but I told him to take a philosophical stance about it, and he did. He went to the internet and did that. He's 10 years old, right? I didn't have to give him much direction. So today, in as far as how profound a youngster can think is really sky's the limit, right? But I want to pick up on Dr. Sharin's point because it's very true. And the problem here now is to look at products. The product space is where the Malaysian companies are very focused on. What's the next product do I make? But if I take Kowe is a fantastic example, right? Kowe now does mattresses. Okay, so they started with water dispensers and now they do mattresses. The water dispensers has basically decimated the bottled water industry in the country, right? And everywhere it's gone. And effectively now you're paying courier for your water in your house, right? Just think about it for a second, right? It's water as a service, but using your own water. So now with the beds, yeah, if you look, one product that they only have one product, right? They have a twin and a single version, but one product. It's a full orthopedic mattress. Go to the bed store and look at what a full orthopedic mattress costs. It's upwards of 12,000 ringgit. Okay. Now that one they sell to you now, what, 139 ringgit or less, I think 98 ringgit for the lowest one. And if you got a bad back, even if you are touching the top end of bottom 40, you might pay for it, right? And they come and clean it for you every 3 months, and they'll tell you you've been sleeping on this disgusting mattress all your life. So once it becomes that one product, which is at the top of the product scale, is now servicing 70% of the market. One product. If you are now an SME whose business is to service a mass production economy with variable products, the writing is on the wall for you, right? And the problem is the leadership in the companies in Malaysia cannot see this horizon happening. It's in their houses, but they don't see it, how it's going to impact their businesses in the next 5 years. And that's going to be devastating.
Now, we are running out of time. Unfortunately, we could probably go on for another hour, but could I kindly ask each of you to perhaps wrap up your thoughts on why empowered leaders will lead to better implementation, and maybe sum up your version of what we've had the discussion today. We can start with Najib, please.
Oh, okay. So I think first, fundamentally, empowerment is a completely different concept in today's leadership scheme. So we are looking at organizations which are much flatter, and therefore empowerment means everybody is contributing to the outcome. The guy in the front is the guy taking a lot of risks, and the person that is able to push forward this team of people. That's how I describe a leader today. No more positions, no more titles.
Sharin, yourself? Okay,
so my perspective is this. I think I truly believe, and this is what I'm teaching at UKM as well, leadership and governance and entrepreneurship. And I truly believe, for Malaysia specifically, I think we really need to focus on leadership, and this change of leadership style is going to be critical. The future leaders are the ones who are going to dictate in terms of whether we can break our condition of middle income trap and all that, whether we can break ourselves from being in a low tech and moving into the high tech, whether we can change our mindset in thinking from a very autocratic leadership to more democratic leadership. So I think leadership is going to play a huge role here. One. Secondly is because when you look at 98% of the businesses are SME, more so that we got to influence, and also at the same time, government agencies, the leadership has to also embrace. And here in the Industry 4.0, when we talk about inclusivity, it means that leadership cannot be autocratic, but rather democratic in terms of empowering others by bringing in others. And when we talk about, you see, Jim Collins put it to me nicely. Yeah, the exceptional organization, apart from having exceptional leaders, the first task is to put the right people in the right places who can really make changes, right? And this is where a great leader really bring up the real talented, based on merits, based on capacity, to really do the real pushing, the real pulling, right? And this is where empowering doesn't mean just about giving a job. Empowering is about giving an expectation and providing all the support. Because if you provide all the expectation and no support, then what kind of leadership is that? So empowerment is actually about setting the direction, setting the vision, and providing all the necessary support. Whether you give them the authority, or you give them the finance, or you give them the right training, or you give them the right tools in order for them to do their job. So that leadership needs to be in there if we were to make the break, at a society level, to bring our economy to the next level.
Malaysia, your final thoughts, please.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think there are many styles of leadership. So even among the youth, you can say they could be laissez-faire or even autocratic. Like some of the youth who run startups are very, very non-democratic in their style when they are the leaders. So I think there's a range of styles. But it's hard to say. I mean, I wouldn't say that any one is better than the other. I think it's about communication and how that style works with the team that you have built. I think the worrying trend in leadership today is that people don't know how to lead. So we often see many one-person organization or one-person ideas because we haven't had that many opportunities to relate to, like a lot of the youth, to relate to each other as peers, as equals, as superiors, as junior, senior. So because of that, they really have not really had much opportunity working in teams, whether they are like number one, number two, and so on. And I think that's really, really important. So to me, at the heart of empowered leadership is trust and competence. So we need our entire organization that we trust them, right? We trust them to be able to make the right decisions when we are there, when we are not there, when no one is looking, when someone is looking. And we also trust them to have a basic level of competence, as Najib pointed out earlier when we talked, that when you have that base level of competence, then the trust builds on that. So that's a lot of things that we need to do, right? Guiding the youth. Yeah, definitely don't let them like run loose, Doctor, I agree with you. It'll never be like a youth or old senior, and I think there will always be an overlap where there are more experienced people in the organization and youth. So in that overlap, that's when the most guidance happens, right? And if we really want quick decision making, good decisions in a very fast-paced, uncertain, complex world, then we need that whole network of trust and competence in the organization. So I think that's where you have to build first, right? You're going to have a base level of competence, then you build the trust, you make sure no one lets you down, and then you can actually move forward in this, IR 4.0. Leading a team, a very highly efficient and successful team in IR 4.0.
Now, on that note, thank you very much to the panelists and also for all the guests who have attended this breakout session. We appreciate it. It's been a very, very lively discussion.